Okay, so let's talk about the first little bit that you time coded out for me. As best as I can tell, he's basically playing this, and then it repeats. Um, I don't actually know the original of this song, so I'm not sure, but I would suspect that the melody might be harmonized slightly differently with a simpler harmony like this. And it's a lot less lush. So what he's doing is he's adding diatonic sevenths. Both of these are minor chords, and he's just adding uh, sevenths to these. So in the first little bit, he's adding it right here. He's taking his D minor, this chord here, and he's adding the seventh right there. And he repeats it on each melody note to reinforce it. And then he ends up doing the same thing on the next chord. Instead of playing this, he's playing the seventh right here. So we'll start at the beginning. So that seventh, it doesn't matter how you play it. Just adding that seventh somewhere really thickens up that harmony. I didn't check too closely. He might also be adding the ninth, which is something that you could do. He might be adding it on that first chord. He could add it in his left hand pretty easily. Right there. Makes a very lush sound, especially when you voice it close like that. I'm not sure if he did that, but that's another thing that you can do here that'll add to the thickness of the harmony. Okay, so let's talk about how we can apply this concept to improvisation or, accompanying a melody that that you're covering. So we'll start with a chord progression that's real basic. 1, 6, 4, 5, 1. So on our sixth chord, we can do exactly what he was doing there and add the minor seventh. So instead of doing, we can go. There's that seventh right there. The nice thing about doing this on your sixth chord is it's pretty easy because your right hand actually doesn't have to change. If you keep playing the one chord and you just change the bass, now you basically made a 6 minor 7 chord. So then we'll move on to the 4 chord. The thing to know without getting too crazy with all the substitutions you can do, a simple substitution that you can do is you can always substitute 4 and the 2 chord. They have the same function. It's a predominant function, so you can use them interchangeably. So in this case, if we want to thicken this up and we don't want to mess with the 4 chord, and we want to use the same ideas that Kyle was using, we can just make that into a 2 chord by changing what's in the bass. So let's have our 1 chord. There's our 6 minor 7, and then all you have to do is play your 4 chord here, and the root, change it to the 2, that D, and now you have a D minor 7 chord. It's your 2 minor 7 chord. And already the progression sounds thicker. And that's basically that kind of thing. So you can just mess with that, and you can pretty safely add your diatonic sevenths to any minor chords to get the effect that he's got going on there. So let's talk about what he's doing a little bit later. I don't know that I have this exactly right. I think the melody is basically doing something like, so he's just got a C major chord here, and he's thickening it up by just moving the chord underneath. It keeps a lot more harmonic motion happening. He's got his left hand going, which adds to that, but you don't even really need that to have as much motion as he's creating. So what he's doing is he's got his hand wrapped around this C major triad, and he's just going. Now the problem is the next melody note is right here and he's already on it. So I think what he does here is he moves down. He just shifts the inversion so that he has more space to move. So it ends up with something like. But basically he's just filling in the gaps. He's basically making 16th notes of everything, and he's filling in the gaps anywhere that there's not a melody note, which here it's pretty easy because they're all on downbeats. So whatever's not a melody note, he's just like, okay, what's in the chord that's within the shape that my hand's already in that I can wiggle? And he just fills it in that way, and it makes it sound thicker and has more motion. So you can do this with lots of lots of songs. In this case, I'd say it works mostly for any section that is moving, or it's easier to use if you have a melody that's moving with scalar motion. So I was trying to think of something. Mary Had a Little Lamb would be a good example. Okay, so we can totally do that thing. And it's easy here because within an octave, I've got these notes that are in that C major chord. I could do different things, but here's a really good example of an easy way to do this. If that reach is awkward, then you could do. Which is closer to what Kyle was doing, where he's moving between inversions that he's noodling on. But that's totally a way that you can do it. So if you want to incorporate this into your playing, first of all, make sure you know your triads and their inversions very comfortably, and then just start walking around with it. And so on. And be aware that you could change when you shift inversions at different points. So right here, I can stay in root position and still get this, or I could go ahead and shift. But by the time I'm on the D, I probably don't want to be doing this. So be aware where you want to shift. But if you get used to that little idea and you're always used to how you're spelling your triad underneath what you're doing, then you can incorporate that pretty much anywhere. You also might want to work on it going down, which is what he was doing. I find that a little trickier, but it's just the same idea as figuring out where you want to shift your inversion. It can get muddy if you don't shift sooner. You probably want more space going down, but just play with that. I haven't done it yet, but give it a shot. Okay, so the next idea is actually the same idea. I didn't listen closely enough to really parse exactly what's happening, but I think he's got this melody that has... I think it actually has a little pickup. Once again, it's scalar, and he's just noodling the top of the chord, and he's playing the melody on the bottom. I think he uses his thumb here to take this little pickup. Something like that. He ends up on there's some sort of a B something chord over here. B flat. Something. But no, the idea is the same. So you could totally just practice this pretty much the same way that you did the other one. Just pick a chord and just walk it up from the bottom instead. You could do it the way that he's doing it, where he has these little anticipations. That just gives you a little extra space, or you could just use downbeats. Either way. So that's just two different ways to approach the same idea. I mean, ultimately, it's just the fact that any space that's not a melody note, he's just doing something in the chord. He's just moving his fingers. It doesn't matter what part of the chord it is. You just need to know how to do the chord. And then it just fills in the space and it makes it sound like there's a lot more motion. Okay, so let's talk about this Hikari lick. I'm not going to cover the exact lick because I didn't entirely pull it apart. I'm pretty sure I know exactly what was happening. But it doesn't matter. If you want to be able to use this, it's the idea behind it that's more important. So I'm going to start with a really basic version of what he's doing, and we'll get increasingly complex closer to what he's doing there. So what I've seen him do in the past is he can just take a basic triad. So we'll just use C major, and he'll use a finger or thumb, whatever, on the root, and he'll hit it, and then he'll hit it again right behind his pinky. And if you practice doing it very quickly, that sounds really freaking awesome. And you can just go all the way up and down the keyboard doing that same idea, because you walk down, it's the same idea. Except your pinky is what's catching the double hit. Same idea. Okay. So you can apply that to thicker chords. Say I wanted to use a C major 7 chord. I could hit the 7th with my thumb afterwards, and so it gives a little more motion. Instead of it being all up, you get this little turn. And you can just elaborate on this almost forever to almost any kind of chord type and thicken it up to have more chord members and just, make it sound like whatever you want. You can apply this everywhere. It's great. Okay, so in this example, he's doing a slightly more complicated version of that. He's using a minor chord. I don't know which one. Doesn't really matter. We're going to use C minor for simplicity, I suppose. In the previous example, he would go up with his right hand only, and that little double tap always happens on the root of the chord. In this case, his thumb is just walking up and arpeggiating behind him. And to fill in the space, he's running the chord up and down in his right hand. So you get something like this. Ah. And so on. So you just need to practice being able to play your triads with the octave in all your inversions, and then just being able to arpeggiate those. And that's all he's doing. He's obviously doing it way faster than I can do it. But that's the idea. It's not a super complicated thing. Okay, so I don't know exactly what he's doing on the way down. I didn't double check, but it doesn't really matter. We can get very close to the effect, and you can alter it a couple of different ways. The most important part is that you've got this steady downward motion with your left hand outlining the arpeggio, and the top hand's just following it. So I'm going to start with these octaves together. And in this case, I'm actually making sure that I'm actually hitting the octaves together when they line up. Right here, it doesn't because I'm at the bottom of the arpeggio. But I'm about to come back down, so. Then I would line up again. That's one way to do that. They don't have to be lined up. So they don't even have to be lined up. I could start on the third here and the root here. And that actually might give a lusher feel. It's the same idea where I'm just offset, but then I don't have to skip it. Like when I was starting all the octaves together, I would have to skip the bottom, give a little break to my right hand. But if I start with the offset, my right hand is just moving constantly. I could probably find a better fingering for that. But that's the idea. It's not so much about exactly what he's doing, but it's the idea of what he's doing, and then you can apply that to everything. Okay, so I looked at your last example, and I'm not going to get into the melody because it's not really relevant to what makes this awesome. What's happening here is this little voicing right here of a chord. If I play it like this, it's a G sus4. If I invert it, it's a C sus2. If I invert it again, it's a whatever that is. It's a stack of fourths. You could argue that this is a D11. So there's your 11 and your minor 7 up there. But it has no third, so it's really nebulous and it doesn't sound strongly like anything. That makes this fit over everything. It just goes with everything, and it sounds like it goes with everything. So like here, you could call this a C add 9. This is that D11 no third I was talking about earlier. You could call this a E minor. So let's see, so that'd be like an E minor 7, but it's got a 13 in it. This would be like a F6 add 2 no third, something like that. I mean, it basically just fits for everything because the chords that end up under it, when you play a bass note under it, diatonic to it, it doesn't really sound like anything super functional, and it gives it a lot of power to do a lot of cool things. And there are a lot of other ideas like that like I kind of automatically go to without just playing that one. But it totally just works. That particular voicing works on everything. So once you realize some of the cool things that sound creates, if you actually like thought about it and analyze it over all these different chords, you start to realize fun things that you can do with chords in general, using some of those ideas. So if I went back to that 1, 6, 4, 5 progression, I can just start adding a lot of these little ideas to that, and it sounds cool. So like the little add 9 on that, or the, yeah, you could call it an add 9 or a sus2 on the C chord. Because the the 2s and the 4s, just a little motion between that stuff, moving around your third works pretty much everywhere. So, those are just some fun ideas that you can just throw at pretty much everything. So good luck.